Some doors open with keys, others only when minds unlock. So tell us in the comments section below, when was the last time someone completely misjudged you? Aubrey Murphy didn't flinch when the man stepped directly in her path. She had barely made it to the bottom stair of the courthouse before the first interruption came. His stance was firm, planted like roots cracking through cement, and his hand hovered inches from his holster. The man's uniform was tight around the chest, his badge shining against dark blue fabric, but his eyes didn't shine. His eyes scanned, up, down, not for danger, for judgment. "Mom," he barked, not asked, not welcomed. Barked. "Courtrooms are for authorized visitors only. You'll need to check in." Aubrey, all of 5'4" and wrapped in a navy pantsuit that had seen more lectures than runways, didn't break stride. She paused, met his gaze, and spoke with the tone of someone who'd long since grown used to this part. "I am authorized," she replied evenly. The man, Chuck Nelson, it said on his name tag, smirked like she'd just told him she was the Queen of England. "And what are you? Legal aid, interpreter, social worker?" The courthouse doors loomed behind him, thick and imposing like they were waiting for the right kind of story to walk through them. Aubrey let out a quiet sigh and reached for her ID badge. It was still tucked into the lining of her briefcase. She knew showing it now wouldn't matter. Not yet. Chuck didn't wait. He stepped closer, dropping his voice low like they were co-conspirators in something. "Look, I get it. You've probably got some papers to drop off for one of your people. That's fine. Just go around back and ask for clerk services. They'll get you sorted." Aubrey's jaw didn't tighten. Her shoulders didn't lift. Her eyes didn't flare. She had trained herself out of all of that a long time ago, because reacting only made them feel bigger. "Thanks for the guidance," she said, brushing past him. He moved to block her again. She stopped. He stared. She waited. Silence danced between them like static. Then, a second security officer, younger, thinner, but no less confident, called from the side. "Hey, Chuck, we're short on the east exit. You want to take it?" Chuck glanced at her one last time and muttered something under his breath as he turned. She watched him walk away, already bracing for the next assumption to come flying at her from somewhere else. He stepped through the courthouse doors. They didn't open for her. They surrendered. Inside, the chaos had already begun. Phones rang with the rhythm of war drums. Heels clacked like sharpened threats on tile floors. Lawyers passed each other without eye contact, their arms loaded with folders and intentions. Someone bumped into her shoulder and didn't apologize. Another person gave her a quick once-over and whispered something to their colleague, which earned a shared laugh. She walked past them all. Aubrey didn't belong here. Not because she was unqualified. Not because she didn't look like the part. But because this space, this courtroom, this glass, this marble, wasn't made for someone like her. Not originally. And yet, here she was. When she stepped into the elevator, a woman already inside, white, tall, red lipstick sharp as her blazer, held her briefcase close to her chest. "You going to 4?" the woman asked. 7. The woman didn't hide the double take. Courtrooms, prosecution, family law, those were on floors 2 through 5. 7 was different. 7 was for judges. "Interns don't usually ride up past 5, the woman said, not smiling. "I'm not an intern." The woman tilted her head slightly, then said nothing else. Floor 7. Judge Harold Weissman stood waiting just outside his chambers. 72 years old, gray hair like steel wool, and known for rulings so sharp they could carve stone. His eyes brightened when he saw her. Genuinely. "Aubrey Murphy," he said with the warmth of someone who hadn't forgotten what kindness was supposed to feel like. "Welcome." She exhaled. Not relief, just calibration. Finally, someone speaking to her like she belonged. "Thank you, sir." He waved her in, then handed her the black robe folded across his forearm like a sacred scroll. "I hope you had no trouble getting in." She didn't lie, but she didn't tell the full story either. It was instructive. Weissman gave a knowing nod. "They'll learn soon enough." As she stepped into his office, she caught her reflection in the glass door. A young black woman with coiled hair pulled neatly back, holding a judge's robe against her chest. Still small, still calm, still unstoppable. Back down in the lobby, Chuck Nelson finally returned to his post. He poured a sip of bitter coffee into his mouth and glanced toward the elevators. Something was off, though he didn't know what. His partner leaned in. "You hear about the new appointment?" the partner asked. "Youngest ever in this circuit. They say she graduated top of her class. Yale. Tough as nails." Chuck shrugged. "Let me guess. White guy with a beard and a chip on his shoulder?" The elevator dinged again. Out stepped Weissman, alone. He adjusted his jacket and turned toward the bench. Chuck didn't know what was coming. Not yet. There were things they didn't see when they looked at Aubrey Murphy. They didn't see the 3 a.m. study sessions in the back of a 24-hour diner off I-95, where she flipped through tort law flashcards while waiting tables in the main room. They didn't see the teenage girl in a hand-me-down blazer standing outside the courthouse years ago, clutching a notebook while her mother argued with a landlord inside. They didn't see the way she'd taught herself how to fold her pain into a weapon that looked like discipline. They just saw a woman who, to them, didn't look like a judge. But that was fine. Aubrey didn't need them to see her. She just needed them to feel her. Her heels clicked steadily as she walked behind Judge Weissman through a long marble hallway, the robe draped over her arm like a flag of quiet victory. Each step forward was a reminder of every backward glance she'd ignored, every time someone tried to doubt her, redirect her, reduce her. The hallway opened into the judge's chambers, a quiet space with bookshelves tall enough to swallow someone whole. The ceilings were high and domed, the air thick with the scent of aged leather and old cases. The clerk's desk outside buzzed with activity, but within these walls, it was still. Weissman poured 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with cream, he remembered. "You nervous?" he asked without looking at her. "No." She folded the robe and placed it across the edge of the chair. "I'm ready." He smiled at that. Not the kind of smile meant to encourage her. The kind meant to acknowledge her. He took a sip and nodded toward the window. "You see that bench across the street?" he asked. Aubrey stepped forward, following his finger. The bench was old, iron-framed, paint chipping along the arms. A cracked manhole steamed behind it, and pigeons were already lining up for their daily loaf. "I sat there every morning the year I started here," he said. "Watched lawyers walk past, watched who greeted the janitor who ignored him, watched who let the door close on someone behind them. You can learn a lot about people just by watching what they do when they think no one notices." Aubrey stayed silent. He looked at her then, his tone shifting slightly. "You're going to change things, whether you mean to or not, just by walking in that courtroom." She didn't flinch. She knew. But she also knew this job wasn't about symbolism. It wasn't about press releases or diversity initiatives or history-making headlines. It was about being better than them all. When no one clapped, when no one was watching, when everything felt too big and too lonely to carry. There was a knock at the chamber door. 5 minutes, the clerk called. Aubrey nodded, slipped into the robe, and felt its weight settle across her shoulders. Downstairs, the courtroom buzzed with tension. It wasn't a packed house, but the people who were there carried presence. Cameras blinked red from the corner of the gallery, reporters scribbled names on notepads, and a young man at the defense table stared down at his folded hands like they could speak for him. This wasn't a small case. It involved a high-profile wrongful arrest, an accusation against a precinct already under heat, and a defense attorney known for playing hardball with sympathetic optics. Aubrey had read the case files. Twice. Then again with fresh eyes that morning. Not because she was afraid of missing details, but because she knew they'd be expecting her to. Whispers grew as the side door opened. Judge Weissman stepped in first, tall and familiar, but then Aubrey followed. And everything shifted. For the whispers didn't stop. They paused, like someone had yanked the cord on a record player, and the room waited to hear whether the music would start again or snap in half. The defense attorney's eyes narrowed. The prosecutor's jaw dropped slightly. Even the bailiff did a double take. But no one said anything, because there she was, black robe, head held high, gavel in hand. She took her seat, adjusted the mic, and spoke. Court is now in session, the Honorable Judge Aubrey Murphy presiding. Her voice was clear, measured, without apology. As she scanned the courtroom, her eyes met Chuck Nelson's. He stood by the wall near the gallery, eyes wide, mouth slightly ajar. He had stopped mid-sip of his coffee. A drip rolled down the side of his chin before he even noticed. He looked like a man watching a ghost walk into his living room and ask for the rent. Aubrey didn't blink. She turned to the clerk, called the first motion. Later that day, during recess, Aubrey returned to her chambers and closed the door softly behind her. She leaned against it for just a moment, letting herself breathe. Just once. Then came the knock again. It was Weissman. He stepped in, handed her a file, and tilted his head with quiet pride. "They'll remember today," he said. "I don't need them to remember me," she replied. "I need them to respect the seat." "Panel calm," he said. "What matters is that you didn't flinch, and they saw that." She gave a short nod and sat down again at the bench, not the literal one, but the mental one, the one where she'd built herself, piece by piece, across years of being doubted, dismissed, and disregarded. This wasn't her beginning. That came a long time ago. But this was her arrival. Oh, weren't ready. Her mother always said there were two kinds of silence in the world, the kind that meant peace and the kind that meant a storm was coming. Aubrey Murphy grew up learning how to tell the difference. She learned in whispers, in looks passed across church pews, in how her mother carried herself at city council meetings even when she wasn't invited to speak. It was never just about what people said. It was about what they didn't say. The silence in their tiny apartment on Florence Street was the kind that throbbed. Not angry, not bitter, just tired. Her mother, Marcia, would come home with tired ankles and a uniform that smelled like lemon disinfectant and cafeteria trays, and she'd still sit with Aubrey for 2 hours to go over vocabulary words. Back then, her mother's voice carried more weight than the rest of the world's combined. "You gotta be better than good, baby. You gotta be undeniable." Aubrey never forgot that. When other kids were sneaking out to parties or hanging out at the mall, Aubrey was reading courtroom transcripts like they were comic books. She didn't come from a line of lawyers. There were no framed Ivy League diplomas in the family, no one she could call for bar exam tips. But she had something else, a hunger. It wasn't just ambition, it was defiance. She saw too many people in her neighborhood swallowed up by a system that never even chewed. She saw kids get suspended for raising their voices in frustration, while others got a stern warning for vandalizing school property. She saw her best friend's cousin serve 6 months for shoplifting while another boy, a white boy from downtown, walked free with a fine for the same thing. Same week, different ending. In high school, she was the girl who corrected teachers when they glossed over court cases in government class. She was the one who got sent to the principal's office for tone when she questioned why advanced placement courses were mostly white. She was the student who kept a spreadsheet of her classmates' disciplinary actions, just to prove there was a pattern. By senior year, most of her teachers were afraid to call on her, not because she was rude, because she was ready. College was a new battlefield. At Franklin State, she was the only black woman in her constitutional law seminar. The professor always called her Miss Murphy with just enough condescension to remind her she wasn't supposed to be comfortable. When she got the highest score on his midterm, he suggested she must have had help. When she aced the final, he didn't say anything at all. She didn't need him to. Then came Yale. It was the place she dreamed about, and yet when she got there, it didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a test. Every hallway, every lecture, every conversation, like walking through a maze designed to confuse her and then blame her for being lost. Her classmates wore privilege like a second skin. They threw around terms like legacy and summer clerkship like they were talking about what they had for lunch. Aubrey just kept her head down and sharpened her mind until it could cut through steel. She didn't go to parties. She didn't join the wine clubs or the sailing associations. She joined the law review. Then she joined the Racial Equity Council and rewrote the bylaws. One professor pulled her aside and told her she was making a name for herself. She smiled and said, "Good, I plan to use it." Years later, when she stood at the podium during graduation as the chosen speaker, because her peers voted for her, not because she asked, she looked out over the sea of gowns and said what no one expected. "I don't want to be remembered as the first. I want to be remembered as the one who opened the door so wide no one ever had to ask to come in again." The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was real. After law school, she could have gone anywhere. Big firms, Washington, the private sector. But Aubrey turned them all down. She wanted to come back. Not because she owed it to anyone. Because she wanted to plant her roots in the same soil that tried to bury her. She joined the DA's office, handled hard cases, handled messy ones. She went after predators, cleaned up old files that had been mishandled for years, and refused to plead out cases just because it saved time. She never screamed in court. She never raised her voice. But her presence filled the room like thunder. People started noticing. Then the call came from the governor's office. They were looking for someone to fill the seat left behind by Judge Bransford's retirement. He was a heavy name in that district, respected. Whitehall, conservative, known for his long rulings and longer silences. Some folks wanted a mirror image. Others wanted progress. The governor wanted results. He chose Aubrey, and she said yes. Not for herself, not for glory, but because she knew someone, someday, would sit in that gallery and see her. Maybe a girl in braids and a second-hand blazer. Maybe a public defender who felt invisible. Maybe just someone looking for justice that didn't come with conditions. They would see her, salute, and it would change everything. Now, sitting behind the bench, robe brushing the back of her neck like a silent drumbeat, she didn't think of Yale or the courtroom winds. She thought of Marcia. Her mother still lived on Florence Street, still worked 2 jobs, still made sweet tea on Sundays like nothing had changed. And in a way, it hadn't. Aubrey was still that girl, watching, learning, building herself from fire and patience. The courtroom doors opened again. More people filtered in. The second half of the day's docket was about to begin. A civil case involving housing discrimination. Another chance to do more than rule. A chance to shift the ground. She took a breath, felt the full weight of her role settle into her spine, and nodded at the clerk. "Bring them in." The training notice went out the next Monday. Every security officer, every clerk, every bailiff, every janitor, every staffer connected to courtroom operations was required to attend a new series of mandatory sessions titled Bias, Assumptions, and the Justice We Promise. The title wasn't flashy, It wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be permanent. Chuck Nelson saw the email first thing when he sat down with his coffee. He read it once, scrolled past it, then came back to it and read it again. The memo was short. The wording wasn't angry or condemning, it was clear. It included a direct line from the newly appointed Judge Murphy herself. Justice begins before the courtroom. It starts with how we're greeted at the door. He sat still for a moment. Then he closed the email without a word. 2 days later, he sat in a folding chair in conference room C, watching a presentation that opened with a security camera still frame, him, hand on his belt, standing in front of a black woman outside the courthouse. No name, no description. Just the image, uncaptioned, unforgiving. He didn't say a word the whole session, recalled. And that was fine. Silence had its place. But Aubrey wasn't interested in humiliation. She was interested in change. The real story was happening elsewhere. Upstairs, in the courtroom, the rhythm of justice had shifted. She saw it in the faces that showed up, young law students scribbling notes in the back row, older women who looked like her mother sitting through entire hearings just to say they'd seen it. She saw it in the prosecutors who started preparing more thoroughly, the defense attorneys who didn't try to talk over her, the clerks who looked her in the eye when handing over case files instead of sliding them across the table. She wasn't just wearing the robe. She was shaping what it meant. One morning, between hearings, a janitor named Arturo tapped lightly on her open door. "Judge Murphy?" he asked nervously. "I was wondering, if it's okay, could I ask you something?" She looked up from her notes and smiled. "Of course." He stepped inside slowly, clutching his cap in his hand. "My daughter, she's 15, loves school, wants to be a lawyer. And I was just wondering if maybe she could, I don't know, see the courtroom sometime. Watch you work." Aubrey stood. "She can come any time she likes, and when she's ready, I'll save her a seat beside me on the bench." His eyes watered before he could stop them. That afternoon, Arturo stayed past his shift just to polish the brass nameplate outside her chambers. He didn't ask, he just did it. Every week more people came. Sometimes they came for the verdict, sometimes they came for the hope. The real change, though, came slowly, in moments. Like when a young black man was called to testify, and his voice trembled until she leaned slightly forward and said, "Take your time. You're heard here." Or when an elderly woman of Southeast Asian descent who spoke halting English found herself facing an eviction hearing and Aubrey paused the room to make sure the interpreter was actually accurate before continuing. Little moments, but weighty ones. In every case she presided over, she reminded the courtroom, not through speech, but through presence, that justice didn't wear a single face. It looked like truth, like care, like conviction backed by restraint. And people started talking. Not in headlines, though those came later. It was in barber shops, nail salons, coffee counters, and subway cars. People saying, "You heard about the new judge?" followed by a grin, a lean in, a little hope in their voice that hadn't been there before. Back at home, her mother watched every interview, every news blip, every quote clipped and reposted online. She clipped them too, paper scissors and all, and slid them into a scrapbook she'd been keeping since Aubrey first made the local paper for winning a citywide writing contest in 5th grade. One evening, after court ended early, Aubrey drove to Florence Street. She didn't call ahead. When she opened the front door, the same familiar scent of lemon cleaner and fried okra hugged her before anyone else could. Marcia looked up from the couch where she was folding laundry and watching reruns. "Look what the cat dragged in," she teased, grinning. Aubrey dropped her bag by the door and slid her shoes off. "Long day," she said, sinking into the couch beside her. Marcia passed her a warm towel from the laundry basket. No words, just that same rhythm they'd had since forever. "I saw the article. Marcia said quietly after a while. The one where they called you the courtroom's quiet storm. Aubrey smirked. Could have been worse. They almost called me Gavel Girl. They both burst into laughter. Then Marcia leaned over and rested her hand on Aubrey. You know, baby, I used to walk past that courthouse and never even look at it. Felt like something that didn't belong to me. But now, sometimes, I walk past real slow, just to see if maybe someone else like me is watching, and I tell them my daughter's up there. Aubrey blinked back tears she hadn't expected. You bit me, she whispered. No, Marcia said, squeezing her hand. You built yourself. I just made sure the floor didn't collapse under you. When Aubrey returned to court the next morning, the hallway lights felt warmer. Or maybe she just walked taller. She smiled at the receptionist, who used to avoid eye contact. She nodded at the young woman in a suit too big for her frame, standing nervously with a stack of files. She paused, walked over. You clerking today? She asked gently. The girl nodded, startled. Aubrey smiled. You're gonna be great. Take a breath. The girl exhaled, as if she'd been holding it for days. The courtroom doors opened. Aubrey stepped in, and for the first time, every pair of eyes in the room watched her, not with confusion, but with respect. The doors hadn't just opened for her. They were open now for everyone. Would you like the dynamic hook short summary and thumbnail concept next? You set